Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed my other videos for Tyrants of the Underdark. In this video, I'm going to give you my actual full opinion of the game itself. Now, Tyrants of the Underdark is a game that's very interesting. You have this very interesting area control game that's mixed with this deck building game, which is actually pretty darn unique. I mean, you can actually look at the game itself and see it's actually two very simple mechanics are actually simply done. You have your very standard area control game, which is basically going to be whoever has the most units in a certain area is going to get victory points. And if they happen to have enough units in a certain area, they're just going to get some extra bonus victory points. Plus, you have some special areas that players can compete for. If they happen to have area control in those areas, they're going to get a couple extra victory points every single turn. So it gives players some stuff to work on as they're playing the game. Some simple as you play mechanics to get victory points, and some simple mechanics to get some victory points at the end of the game. So it's a really simple game. There's nothing that we've never seen before. Then you also have this deck building game. Again, it's nothing too complex that we haven't seen before. You have cards that are going to cost you a certain amount of points. These cards are going to give you a certain amount of abilities. And again, these cards are going to give you some victory points at the end of the game. Again, it's nothing special that we haven't seen before. It's actually pretty much, I'd probably say it's about the complexity level, probably just ever so slightly above Marvel Legendary, which is a pretty simple game. Players just play out their cards and get all their resources and get from playing those cards, do a couple actions, and the turn's going to be over. The interesting thing about Tyrants of the Underdark, though, is how it marries these two very simple mechanics to create a game that is much better than the sum of its parts. And now just talking about the deck building game itself, just to show you an example. You have your average deck building game where you're just buying cards. These cards can give you effects. But how you build that deck when you do the deck building mechanics doesn't make a huge difference. Because you have these 4 different decks, and each one of these decks has a special theme, and they have a special mechanic that's going to really match their theme very, very well. You have the Dragon deck, which has a couple very heavy-hitting cards. You have the Dragon cards, and the interesting thing is this is one of the few decks in the game that actually has cards that allows you to recycle in the marketplace. Now, if you watch the tutorial video, you'll see that there's no actual mechanic to recycle your marketplace at all, unless you start including cards from the Dragon deck. So you see there's certain things that are going to happen if you include the Dragon deck. And if you want a game where you have lots of asymmetry, where you're going to have lots of cards that are going to feed off each other, buy a lot of fire cards, they're going to feed off each other, buy a lot of air cards, the cards are going to feed off each other, and it's going to reward the player for picking cards smartly and just not buying any card they want, but buying cards that are actually going to help their deck. You have the elemental deck, so it creates an interesting mechanic there also. Plus, they've taken the deck deconstruction mechanic by if you take the Fiend deck, you're going to have the cards that start destroying some of your cards. And then you have the Drow deck, which has lots of spy mechanics, the ability to promote a lot of cards, which are going to remove them from your deck. But the nice thing is it's going to give you some extra victory points at the end of the game. So you have this nice little balancing act. Do I take this card because I know I'm coming close to the end of the game, I can still use this card right now, but do I promote this card to get the extra victory points because I sense the end game is coming quickly? Or do I use this card now for its special ability because the special ability is going to be very powerful and it's going to give me more victory points than I would get just by having this area. So you see that's a little bit of a deck building game. It's actually smarter than what it looks like on the surface. On the surface, it looks like a simple deck building game, but it's actually more complex than that. And just with the area control game, it looks like a simple area control game, but it's much more complex than that just because of how you're going to spend these cards, going to allow you how to move around the board, and how you're purchasing your cards to build up your deck is going to influence the decision and what kind of strategy you're going to go for. Because another cool thing about this game is you're not locked into one single strategy. You can do the strategy where you're buying a whole bunch of cards and promoting a whole bunch of cards to get victory points that way. And that strategy can work very, very well. You can also do a strategy where you're completely going for area control dominance. You're going to sit there and buy as many cards as you can. They're going to give you power to go ahead and attack the board, and you get units that are going to allow you to assassinate, to start collecting bodies, which are going to give you victory points. It's a very valid strategy. You can also use cards if you use the right deck, so start destroying cards so you have a very lean, very efficient deck where you're basically cycling the same 10 to 15 cards over and over again to get those extra victory points. So there's multiple strategies of the game. There's multiple ways to play the game, and it just makes it an interesting game. Sure, we've seen all these mechanics before, but how they're married together creates a game that is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, you have to be very careful when you play Tyrants of the Underdark, though, because it's kind of deceptive. Like I said, you have these very simple-looking mechanics, but there's a very strong way to play this game. There's a good way to play this game, and there's basically a wrong way to play the game. And I'm sure you can say that just about any game at all, but I'm sure we can also admit that there's are games out there on the market that kind of do some hand-holding. You have your games such as your point salad games, which allow you to just get a whole bunch of victory points, but this is definitely a game that's going to reward smart play over not-so-smart play. And you're going to see that in the way you're purchasing your cards, the way you're doing the area control, and this game is going to evolve based on a whole bunch of different factors, making sure that the game's going to play different every single time you play the game. Let's just look at the area control board itself. You have this game that's been smartly designed because it's going to minimize the board size based on the amount of players, which for some reason doesn't seem like everybody does it with an area control game, and I can never understand why this is not a thing that exists with every single area control game. With area control games, the idea is you need to have a lot of tight area where players are constantly fighting over those areas. So they've done a smart thing where they shrunk down the board based on the amount of players. In a two-player game, you can use the center of the board. In a three-player game, you use the center plus one of the sides. And in a four-player game, you can use the entire board. So it's going to be cramped and feel cramped every single time you play the game, which is a strong aspect you need in every good area control game. Players need to feel like there's limited resources. They need to fight over those resources, and all those resources will give them the victory points they need in the game. The game is also played very tactically when it comes to the market supply deck, and this is another thing you need to really understand about the game. This isn't really a strategy game. This is very much a tactical game where you need to be adjusting your strategy based on the cards you're getting into your hand, based on the marketplace cards that are coming up, and also based on the aspects of the board as it's changing as you play the game. Because you can't go into this game saying, okay, my strategy for this game is I'm going to go for total board dominance. And if you have that mindset through the entire play of the game, you're going to lose the game because a lot of cards may come up that are not going to allow you to get board dominance, and you're going to lose the game. So you need to play this game very tactically, constantly change your strategy based on the cards that are coming up in the marketplace. And I'm going to get into this in just a second about how this can be a positive or a negative. But this is a marketplace that is very, very, not stagnant, but this is a very strong marketplace that is not going to be very mutable as you play the game unless players are purchasing a lot of cards. And you're going to notice that's going to make a big, big difference when you're playing the game between a two-player game and a four-player game. See, in a two-player game, it may happen occasionally where you're going to see cards coming out that no player wants to really buy, either because they haven't been purchasing cards smartly and they can't afford the cards that have come up, or cards are out there that they really don't want to add to the deck because they're not going to affect their strategy. So in a two-player game, you may see this marketplace not moving as much, whereas in a four-player game, this marketplace may move more. And this is where we're going to get into something that some people may find as a negative about Tyrants of the Underdark. See, there's no marketplace cycling mechanic built into the game, and that can be a very strong component of how a lot of these deck building games play. See, if cards come up and you need cards and you add them to your deck, if the cards you need are not here at this marketplace, you have no options unless, again, you're playing with the dragon deck. And there's a couple cards in here that allow you to cycle the marketplace, but there's not a lot of them in there. And not only do they have to come into play, but you pretty much have to be playing with this dragon deck to have this effect. So if you're not playing with the dragon deck and you see a lot of cards coming up here that nobody wants, this marketplace can stagnate a little bit, which can change the way you're playing the game. You're basically left with two options at that point. Do I buy a simple card in the hopes that I'm going to open up the marketplace and bring out the cards I really need, and then eventually I'm just going to use this card as a sacrificial card or whatever kind of card I want to do, or maybe I'll even promote it to get back out of my deck? Or do I just completely ignore the marketplace and start moving back to the area control aspects of the board? But then again, is the area control aspects not working that well depending on the marketplace? So again, this game goes from being a strategic game, which this game is not, to a very tactical game where players need to constantly evolve the way they're playing based on the player count, because the board size is going to change. Player count is also going to affect the way the marketplace is cycling, and also you're also going to change your strategy based on the tactical way. You're going to have to change the way you tactically play your strategies based on the way the cards are coming out. So this is a game that you have to be constantly being very active, being very aware of the market, being very aware of the board, and being very aware of how the game is playing out, and not be afraid to constantly change your tactics if what you're doing isn't working or if the marketplace isn't working in your favor. And I haven't even talked about the spies in the game, which adds another deep layer to the game and the way the game is going to be played. And again, we're going back to the marketplace over here, because you cannot use any of your spies at all in the game unless you have cards that allow you to use the spies in the game. And the spies are what's going to allow you to be able to expand across this board in a way that's going to allow you to start influencing the other players by putting spies out there and making their life difficult. Using your spies to go to other locations, which is going to give you the presence to also go to those locations, which is going to change up the strategy of the game. So the spies, much like the Underdark themselves, are the secret assassins that are going to help you win the game, and I love how that mechanic works. But again, it's also going to rely on that marketplace, making it, again, still pretty much a very tactical game versus a game that's made to be where you're planning long-term strategies. If you get the cards, take advantage of those cards, and you know how to take advantage of those cards on your turn, you're going to have a lot of fun with this game. But if you play this game very bullheaded and set up to play with one strategy only, this game is going to be not a very enjoyable experience for you, because you're going to see that it's not always going to go in your favor. Sure, you may get lucky sometimes, and you may get the cards you need, and everything will be wonderful, but it's not always going to be like that, so you need to be ready to adapt your strategies at all times, and make sure you're ready to change your strategies when your strategies aren't working, whether it happens to be going out after locations, getting spies and allow you to expand across the board, or just start promoting cards, because that's the best way to get those victory points. Now, Tyrants of the Underdark is a very interesting game. It takes two very different gameplay mechanics. You have a simple area control and a fairly simple deck building game, and allows them to be put together in a game that I could almost say is not that much above your basic intro games. In a way, it reminds me a lot of Lords of Waterdeep, which is another game that on its surface has mechanics that aren't that hard to explain, not that difficult to explain, and the theme is there. I mean, this game I think has a little more theme than Lords of Waterdeep, but I'd like to say that this game is actually not that hard of a game to learn. I mean, it's easy to explain to people that if you want to go for a strategy where you're going across the board, you want to get these victory points, you just got to get your units on the board. If you want to start spreading across the board, you got to get your spies. Oops, I'm cheating. You got to get your spies and send them to a location, so you start spreading into other areas by using your influence and your presence to start moving to other locations. So that's one way to play the game. It's not that hard. And then the deck building mechanics aren't that hard either. If you want to buy a card, have the influence to pay for it, and then just simply do what the card says. It's really not that hard to explain the game, so it does make a very good gateway game, combining two mechanics that are actually representing the board gaming hobby very well. There's tons of great area control games in the hobby. There's tons of great deck building games in the hobby. So this can be a very good intro game to help start teaching you to learn these games, much like Lords of Waterdeep. Now, unfortunately, using the reference of Lords of Waterdeep, it's kind of unfortunate. Now we come to one of the big unfortunate things about the game, and I kind of mentioned this in my playthrough video, but I definitely want to hammer home this point right now. Hasbro has spoiled us as board gamers. Hasbro has shown us, and I guess we can also say Mix versus Minions has also spoiled us, because they have shown us what can happen if a publisher is able to order games in such a mass quantity that they can get these games out on the marketplace at a lower price point. You can look at Hasbro with all their D&D Adventure System games. You're looking at a game that has average of 60 plus miniatures, thick cardboard tiles, and lots of components in them, which you can get for about $45 online. You have Lords of Waterdeep, which you can get for $40 on average. That has quite a bit of components, and actually pretty good quality components in the game. You can even look at the Magic the Gathering Planeswalker, I forgot the name of the game, but the Planeswalker board game where you have the miniature games, which is the spiritual sequel to Hero Quest, which you can get for $30. And heck, I've seen it on sale for $15. There's like 20 plus miniatures in there. Yeah, they're not the greatest miniatures in the world, but it shows us just how cheap a board game can be purchased if it's bought in very large mass quantities. And now we come to the biggest negative I can lay against Tyrants of the Underdark, and that's the fact that you're spending $75 on a game, and it does not feel like there's $75 worth of components in this box. We can go ahead and look at the pieces used for every single one of the players. Every single player uses these shields. And let's be honest, I'm spending $75 for shields. I would have rather spent $50 for this game and just have every single one of those being replaced with cubes. Because then I could have done what I did here anyways, thrown all those cubes out and replaced it with some very good miniatures. Let's be serious. What looks better on this board game? Looking at these little shields that are pretty much no better than cubes, or looking at these little guys on the board. You have a guy who's got a sword, he's got a shield, and it looks like he's getting ready to go to battle across the board. I think you know the answer to that. And just adding these miniatures made the game look so much better. And it's really hard to do a sale here by telling somebody to go out there and spend $75 on this game when it doesn't look like it's $75 worth of components inside that box. Now, I don't want to sit here and harp on the components overall because, it's one of the biggest negatives I can lay at the game, but at least it's only one negative. And honestly, it's a negative that's very easy to fix if anybody's wanted to put a little bit more money into the game like I have. All I did is I just pillaged a copy of Risk, which had these little figures in them, and I used them to replace all of my miniatures for the game, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. But it is a really unfortunate thing, and I did have to mention that it is kind of a disappointment to spend that much money for the components you get in the game. Although it is really nice to say that at least the artwork in the game is really fantastic. There's some great artwork throughout the game. Every one of these cards has different artwork. I mean, there are some cards that are duplicated. There may be up to 3 of every single card in every one of these decks, but you're still looking at least well over 100 pieces of individual artwork in the game. I'm going to probably around there at least. I know there's a lot of artwork in the game. I mean, the back of the cards don't look that great. Yeah, it's purple, but that does match the Underdark and does match the theme of the game. And the board itself actually looks really, really cool. Now, if you've done a lot of reading of the Forgotten Realms, it does match the theme of the game. You have this kind of dark background, and it fits the theme of the game. And I can't really explain it to you without explaining hundreds of books, so to speak. But trust me, this does match the theme of the game. They did a good job. The artwork for the various locations is pretty nice. Now, they could have spruced it up a little bit, but you know what? I'm really happy with it. I thought it looked really good. Only change I would have made is probably putting the cities, this picture of the city on these little tokens, make them look a little bit fancier, but that's the only real complaint I can have about there. Other than that, the game looks really good with the artwork on the cards. Front of the cards, just replace those miniatures and you're looking at a game that looks really good. Now, the game itself plays really well from 2 to 4 players thanks to the ability of the board to expand based on the amount of players that you have in the game. But I do have to say that when you play with this as a 4-player game, it is going to be a little bit of a longer of a game. Probably can take you up to maybe 2 hours to play a full 4-hour game, or I'm sorry, a full 4-player game, whereas a 2-player game, you probably get in under 45 minutes. And then again, the game does play really well at 2 players, but just understand the market's going to come in a little bit slower sometimes, especially if you're playing with players who want to get the perfect deck and they're not willing to sacrifice a few rounds to get some less than optimal cards just to ensure that they're going to keep advancing that marketplace. Overall, I think the game is very well done. I think it's a fantastic game. It's a game I'm happy to have in my collection. I think it plays great at all player accounts. I love how they blend the mechanics together to create 2 game mechanics that together are definitely greater than the sum of their parts. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as soon as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Also, support the channel. Your support can help bring out new content and keep the channel going. Just head on over to patreon.com/otsbgr. patreon.com/otsbgr. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed this video series. Click that like button, click that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching.